We think so.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Mark Butler, and this is Lucy. And we're both here because we're very interested in coal. It's not because we got an unexpected call from daycare that Lucy's here. I'm very much looking forward to this talk and to the phase out of coal in Nova Scotia. It's historic to be able to say that, and I look forward to it for multiple reasons, from the health benefits that will accrue to the citizens of Trenton to, I think, the economic benefits that we will see from moving off imported coal. I would like to begin today's event by acknowledging the fact that we are gathering on unceded Mi'kmaq territory here in Chippewa, or Halifax, as we discuss issues of shared environment, climate change, and justice. It is critical to remember our relationship to this land and to take leadership from the Mi'kmaq people and their continued relationship to this land, stretching back over millennia. You'll be glad to hear that Lucy and I are not moderating. My role simply is to introduce Lisa Mitchell. Lisa Mitchell is the newly appointed Executive Director of the East Coast Environmental Law Association, a wonderful organization that has been around for 10 years now and provides legal advice and education on the environment to citizens and organizations across the 4 Atlantic provinces. And Lisa is a perfect person to head this organization with her legal background and her accumulated experience in the world of environment and working with many organizations, and just her excellent judgment. And so, for that reason, we're so happy that you agreed to be a moderator today, and thank you very much, and look forward to a really interesting discussion and presentations from our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Very kind words. I'm really excited about this panel today as well, and to listening to our featured guest speaker, Bruce Lourie. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Bruce. He is the president of the Ivey Foundation, a private charitable foundation that supports the development of a shared vision for Canada that integrates the economy and the environment. He's a director of the Independent Electricity System Operator in Ontario, and he sits on the advisory board of Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission. Bruce has played a pioneering role in connecting environmental issues to human health, most notably with his leadership in the effort to phase out coal-fired power plants in Ontario, the single largest climate action in North America. Bruce is the co-author of 2 best-selling books, including the internationally acclaimed Slow Death by Rubber Duck, great title, and equally compelling Talks In, Talks Out. During his 20-plus year career, Bruce has founded a number of for-profit and non-profit organizations, including Summerhill Group, the Sustainability Network, and the Canadian Environmental Grantmakers Network. He has acted on numerous international, federal, provincial, and municipal bodies, advising on environmental, energy, and health policy issues. He's with us today to share some experiences and to help us build on the energy efficiency successes in Nova Scotia, and maybe to have a little bit of seafood if he gets the chance. Please join me in welcoming Bruce Lourie.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks, Mark, and to all the great folks at Ecology Action Center for pulling this event together. It's super timely, of course. I think what's exciting is we're in a phase now in Canada where, after years and years of talking about investments in energy efficiency and needing to move to a low carbon economy, in improving the infrastructure of our country, we're at the point where it's actually starting to happen. And so it's no longer a need for those of us who have been working for many years on these issues to really try to push our governments too much harder in making those commitments. Most of those commitments have been made. And the issue we now face is how do we deliver on the commitments? How do we do it in an economically sound way? And how do we make sure that we don't start backsliding on some of the commitments that we are making? So it's just, I'm just really pleased to be here. As my friends at the Ecology Action Centre know, I absolutely love being in Halifax and in Nova Scotia, one of my very favorite places. And very exciting things going on here. So I have a short, what I'm going to do is I have a couple of short slides and also some notes I'm going to speak on. And I suspect if I do this, can't do that. Really fast mouse. So I thought it might be worth just for a minute to sort of step back and think where we've come from 30 years ago. Almost 30 years ago, the report, the Grove Harlem Brundtland report came out that really defined our concept of sustainability. And it was the idea that we are integrating ecology, economy, and society, and that fundamentally we're trying to make sure that we're not consuming resources today that are compromising our ability to meet future needs. And I think if we just, I'm just going to run through a couple of these quickly just to give us a sense of where we are 30 years later. So we're on track right now for a 3 to 4 degree increase in climate or global climate temperatures, which of course we know is going to cause tremendous harm in many parts of the country. We're seeing ice caps melting. This is a projection of what southern Florida might look like in 30 years with literally billions and billions of dollars flooded. We're seeing this when I was in California last year. Literally, as I was arriving, the hills were on fire. Australia is seeing the same kind of challenges with increasing temperatures, species extinctions. And what's interesting when you look at the graph, the numbers are really tiny, but the inflection point is around 1950. Like that's not from 1850. That's just in the last sort of post-war period of these massive species extinctions. Don't have to explain fish collapse to folks out in this part of the world. Again, these are dramatic changes to biodiversity in a very short period of time. And then add on top of that income inequality, which is part of the sustainability piece. And you can see by all of those measures in terms of, are we achieving ecological sustainability? Haven't done such a great job. Are we achieving social equity? Haven't done such a great job. Although the economy has really grown dramatically. So I kind of frame a lot of what I do. But given what we know and where we're going, why don't we act? We'll talk about that in the context of coal plants, hopefully in a positive way. So the part of my assessment of this is the original framing of ecology, economy, society, and trying to find the point at which those things intersect is not working in our current frame. And that really, I think the way we need to be thinking is that society functions within ecology. We have ecological boundaries to what we do, and that the economy really is nothing more than a mechanism to help us make society function. And if we start thinking about, oh, well, we're going to try to balance the economy with ecology and with society, then we run into the situation we are today where most of the fundamental measures of ecology are not getting us where we need to get to. So that really is just the opening context for me to think through this. And what I want to do now is turn very specifically to the Ontario coal phase-out. And the one thing, I guess, to frame this, which people, even Will and I were chatting at the beginning, people sort of forget, is the Ontario coal phase-out, even though it was described by Al Gore as the single largest climate action in North America, wasn't done because of climate change. Climate change was barely part of the conversation when we started the campaign And this is now going back to the late 1990s. What drove the Ontario coal phase out was public health. And so part of the role that I played was getting the doctors and specifically the Ontario Medical Association involved. Because at the time, Ontario had a very significant smog problem. And the doctors concluded that 1,600 people were dying prematurely every year in Ontario because of air quality problems. And that thousands more were being admitted to hospitals. And that not only was that an obvious health problem, but it was contributing significantly to the health cost burden. So we, in Canada, unlike in the US, we have the benefit where the government is responsible for health care, for health costs, and for overseeing essentially the electricity supply mix. And so it was a compelling argument for the government of Ontario that by phasing out coal, they would significantly address the ballooning health costs as well as the very acute health problems that we were facing in southern Ontario. And even at the time, back in around 2000, the campaign to phase out coal was run by a guy named Jack Gibbons with the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, and he did an absolutely brilliant job. And way back then, we had commitments from the Conservative government, the NDP, and the Liberal government that all of them agreed that we needed to phase out coal. Another piece that was important, and when we did the initial assessment looking at is this doable or not in Ontario, so number one was Ontario imported all of its coal. There's no domestic coal production in Ontario. Half of it came from Alberta, half of it came from the United States, but there's no real economic benefit on that front. I think important too, I think in Nova Scotia, because of the history of coal mining, there's a perception that the coal being mined, or about to be mined, I think, in Nova Scotia, will go into the coal plants here, but most of it, I think over 95% of it, will actually be exported as metallurgical coal, and some of the experts here can correct me if that's not precise. So Nova Scotia has a similar advantage in that you're not burning coal to keep the coal mines open in Nova Scotia. The other factor in Ontario is that most of the coal-fired power plants were built in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So these were power plants that had to be replaced. And what we saw, and just to get a sense of the quick history, about 40 years ago in Ontario, the electricity was largely hydro dams from Niagara Falls, some old coal plants built in the 60s and 70s, and some distributed hydro plants in northern Ontario. And then as the population grew and some of the old coal plants were phased out, Ontario made a big investment in nuclear power. And at the time, and some of you may remember, there was this notion that nuclear power would be too cheap to meter. There would be so much electricity coming out of them. And of course, the nuclear power plants in Ontario were billions and billions and billions of dollars over budget and many, many, many years behind schedule. And that really started the dynamic that we're in today right now in Ontario and created the base for more expensive electricity. So what governments have done over the past couple of decades, and this is quite legitimately, it doesn't matter whether it's the NDP or the Conservatives or the Liberals, they all want to mess with the electricity system, and mostly what they want to do is artificially suppress prices and do kind of funny accounting. So one of the big funny accounting things was when they took the nuclear debt out of the electricity rates and started to subsidize it to keep rates artificially low in Ontario. So what we had was years and years of artificially suppressed electricity prices, and again, it was all various governments doing it for various reasons. And so when the NDP was in power back in the 90s, it was a big election issue. They lost the election. The Conservatives were elected, partly on a platform of deregulating and privatizing electricity. The Conservatives, the idea was they'll unleash market forces, and that'll naturally reduce electricity prices in Ontario. However, at the time, Ontario's electricity rates were far less, almost half of what all the neighboring jurisdictions were, so Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, New York. And there had been very few investments in the electricity system in Ontario. So despite when I was involved, I was on the Mike Harris's Electricity Transition Committee. I was very active in those days. And I was sitting in the rooms with the ministers where everyone was telling him, no, the prices will go up if you do this, not go down. So they broke up the system, created OPG, Hydro One, various other subsidiaries. And then of course, the day of reckoning when the market opened. The market opened, electricity prices skyrocketed. And the first few days of the open market, on some of those days, electricity prices were 1,000 times what they were previously under the regulated electricity market. So of course, what does the Premier do? He shuts down the competitive electricity market, caps electricity prices at 5 cents. Once again, we get back into an artificial subsidy mode. Basically, all of the investment that was about to go into Ontario dried up. Every company that was proposing to build a power plant under the new competitive electricity market left Ontario, and we had 8 years of zero investment in the electricity system in Ontario. So that then led, and there was an election issue, and guess what? The Conservatives lost, the Liberals came into power, and Ontario was actually facing brownouts. So we had a serious problem in Ontario where the electricity supply wasn't able to meet the demand, and very quickly the Liberal government realized they had to start building new power plants. But so just imagine at the time, they had both committed to phasing out coal while facing electricity shortages, so a huge challenge. And really, there were two pieces that came together at the time. There was and something called the Ontario Power Authority, which I was on the board of for a number of years, was created. And the role of the Ontario Power Authority was to basically build out new supply as quickly as possible to avoid any reliability challenges, and also to invest heavily in energy efficiency, because still to this day, the number one most important thing we can do is invest in energy efficiency. It's the cheapest way to get electricity into the system is by not using more electricity. So I think the Ontario Power Authority very successfully solved the reliability problem, and then starting to phase out coal, and then brought in something called the feed-in tariff, which was the renewable program that paid quite significant subsidies to solar farms and wind farms and biomass and all sorts of renewable power. So we're at the point now where we're going to have another election. Electricity is going to be the number one topic in the election, and the government's going to lose. So it's fascinating just to see the politics of electricity. And one of the reasons why I think it's going to be a challenge for the Wynne government in the next election is basically when you have an electricity system that for literally 3 decades there's no investment, and suddenly you pile on a whole lot of new investment in less than a decade, naturally the prices go up. And a colleague of mine used to be on the board, he used to run a utility in the United States, said, would say that if you drove around in a 1965 Pontiac, it cost $4,000, and now in 2016 you want to buy a new car, it's not going to cost $4,000. In fact, it's probably going to cost $25,000 or $30,000 or $40,000. So imagine if suddenly you had 5 of those cars, and now you need 5 new cars. You're going to pay a whole lot more. So the reality is, whether you like it or not, when you're replacing anything old with anything new, it's going to cost you a whole lot more, and somebody has to pay for it. So this isn't a unique problem in Ontario. It's not a unique problem in Nova Scotia. If you travel anywhere around, almost anywhere that I've traveled around the world these days, you will read stories in newspapers about people complaining about increasing electricity prices, because everyone sort of had this same growth mode of investing a whole lot in the 50s and 60s, living off those investments for 3 or 4 decades, and now realizing we have to reinvest. So it's the reality of global electricity prices. And I hate to say they will go up here. There's no electricity prices going down anywhere in the world that I'm aware of. We just have to understand that that's how the world works. Like we're talking about it today. I pay an insane amount of money, it seems to me, for my cable TV, my internet, my cell phone, all of that stuff. The prices go up every year. People aren't marching in the streets wondering why our cable bills are going up. But the second your electricity bill goes up 10 cents, everyone thinks the government has to do something about it. So I think we have to shift that mindset that if we actually want a more competitive electricity system, we can't expect the government to control it. And frankly, the experience in Ontario has been the more the government meddles, usually the less benefit there is for the ratepayer. In that perspective, I can say that now because I'm actually no longer on the board of the Independent Electricity System Operator. My term ended December 31st. That's part. So I just really wanted to explain, what happened in Ontario, which is happening actually in many places. And the number of times that I can hear people in Ontario, usually politicians from other parties, say that, it's literally here regularly, Ontario has the highest electricity prices in North America. Well, no, Ontario doesn't even have the highest electricity prices in Canada. And if you look across the border, New York pays twice what we pay for electricity. Illinois pays twice what we pay for electricity. California pays almost twice what we pay for electricity. Go across the ocean. The Germans pay almost 4 times what we pay for electricity, and the British pay almost 4 times what we pay. So we have this bizarre sense that for some reason in Canada, we should be paying less for electricity than everybody else in the world. And the reason for that is we have Quebec, we have Manitoba, and we have British Columbia. They have extraordinary hydro resources, and they do pay less than everyone else in the world. But we're not Quebec, and we're not BC or Manitoba. So if we compare ourselves to like jurisdictions like New England, you'll find that the electricity rates in Canada are exactly on par, and typically less than what you'll find in like jurisdictions. So we need to, we need to look more carefully at what the facts are when it comes to electricity pricing. My thought in Nova Scotia is, and I think too it's important, I've got one more slide here, before I get into that. I don't know if anyone saw the Fraser Institute came out with a report this week that basically says, I can't bring myself to actually reading a Fraser Institute report, but from what I've heard, it says that Ontario made huge investments in and paid a huge amount of money to phase out coal, and there was zero environmental benefit for that investment. So this graph shows, as I said, this was a public health issue, not a climate issue. In Ontario, we were getting, say on average 20 to 25 smog advisories a year, most of those in the summer. You can see 2005, a particularly bad year, 53 days of smog advisories. And so a smog advisory day in southern Ontario, basically the sky is brown, the sun's a little ball through the brown sky, it smells, and if you have asthma like me, you cough and choke when you go outside. It's not a great thing to have a smog advisory. So the last coal plant shut down end of 2013, 2014, 15, and 16, not a single smog advisory in Ontario. So I'm not sure, well, I've reviewed a lot of Fraser Institute reports in the past, which is why I don't read them anymore. But they basically, fabricate numbers and do reports on why smoking is good for you and, why child labor is a great thing. So there's just no validity at all to anything in that report. But it's really important to know because it was an argument when we were running the campaign in Ontario that it didn't matter what we did in Ontario. There's all these cars, there's all these coal plants in Ohio. wind from us, and that our air quality won't improve. But the reality is air quality has improved dramatically, visibly dramatically, and then empirically with this research. So just to give a sense of where Canada's at, so I'm going to have to wrap up in a minute or two here. You can see the dramatic reduction in greenhouse gases in Ontario as a result of the coal phase-out. And you can see number 2 in Canada is Nova Scotia for the cap here. So Nova Scotia has actually, I think, done an exemplary job of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that's important to keep in mind. But I think my final point is I'm just going to put, I would say, a push on the need to set a target. So Ontario set an initial target of this phase out of coal plants. To be honest, I forget what date it was, maybe 2008, and then that slipped a bit to 2010, then it slipped a bit to 2013. But we didn't get overly upset that the target slipped a little bit. It was a very, very, very aggressive target and tough to meet. And with my experience on things like the Power Authority and the ISO, these are complex decisions that people don't understand the physics of electricity systems, the reliabilities of electricity systems. So the fact that Ontario took a few years more, it didn't bother me one little bit. But what I worry more about is right now in Nova Scotia not having a hard date. So and I know the other panelists will talk about the deal with the climate framework and the 2013 target. But I think it's very important to set a clear date, to put certainty in the market, and try as hard as you can to meet a committed date like 2030. I think it's quite doable here. And if it slips a bit, it slips a bit. But what it does is when you see those hard targets, it realigns the work of utilities, it realigns the work of government, and it basically puts people in a framework of we need to get this done. And if you don't have a hard target, it won't set that kind of policy framework and decision-making structure within governments and utilities. So, so I will just end by encouraging you to as best we can in this province to set that hard date, work hard to try to meet it, and if you don't meet it, don't get too broken up about it. But it's better off to set a specific target. So I am, I think, this will be my concluding slide. So a whole lot of good reasons to work on this stuff. Anyway, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That was very insightful and really interesting to hear the experience in Ontario. So the plan for the rest of the session is we have 3 panelists who will also be singing. I think Bruce is planning to join us, so the 4 will sit here at our panel. And I'm going to introduce each of them in the order that they'll be speaking. They will each have 5 minutes to speak to what Bruce had to say and other things they may wish to say. And then we will open it up for questions from the audience, yourselves, and have an opportunity to have a bit of a dialogue. So I'm going to start off, and maybe while I'm introducing folks, you can make your way to the panel. So our first speaker of the panelists will be Jason Hollett. Jason is the director of the Climate Change Unit at Nova Scotia Department of Environment. He began working for the province at the Department of Energy in 2006, focusing on community renewable energy, and he moved to Nova Scotia Environment in 2008 to manage a community and business environmental technology fund. And then on to managing role with the Climate Change Directorate. And in this current role, Jason is leading a team of dedicated staff who are developing Nova Scotia's cap-and-trade system and other climate initiatives. Jason has a bachelor's degree in business and education from St. Mary's and Mount St. Vincent University, respectively. And please take a moment to welcome Jason to our panel. Our next speaker will be Michael Sampson. Michael is the Director of Generation Asset Management at Nova Scotia Power, Inc. And in this role, Mike is responsible for generation resource planning, asset condition and investment management, and related engineering services. He undertakes these responsibilities as Nova Scotia Power faces a significant transformation of its power system away from a predominantly base-loaded coal-fired generating fleet towards an aggressive integration of renewable electricity. Mike has over 30 years of experience with Nova Scotia Power. He previously served as the director of the Nova Scotia Power System Operator, where he was responsible for the safe, efficient, and reliable operation of Nova Scotia's electric power system. And he's held other roles in hydro generation operations, environmental policy, and thermal generating station engineering and maintenance. Mike is a professional engineer, registered with the Engineers of Nova Scotia, and he has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from TUNS, the Technical University of Nova Scotia. Please welcome Mike. Finally, last but never least, Meinhard Doelle is a professor of law here at the Schulich School of Law. He specializes in environmental and energy law with a focus on climate change and environmental assessment process. He's been involved in the practice of environmental law in Nova Scotia since 1990, and in that capacity, he served as the drafter of the initial Nova Scotia Environment Act and as a policy advisor on the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. Professor Doelle has written on a variety of environmental law topics, including climate change, energy law, environmental assessments, and public participation in environmental decision-making. I can't go on without saying that he's a founding board member of the East Coast Environmental Law Association, and he provides invaluable advice to students, environmental law organizations, and government in Nova Scotia and beyond. Please welcome Meinhard Doelle. Bruce will join them on the panel, and then we'll start with you, Jason.
Everybody hear me okay? Thanks for the invitation, and really appreciate Gabby and Mark for organizing this for hosting and acknowledging the panelists here with me. Really quickly, we've got 5 minutes to go through kind of the storied history of the progress that Nova Scotia's made on greenhouse gas emissions, specifically to the electricity sector in Nova Scotia. That started, and I think there's a lot of parallels, Bruce, I noticed from your description of the Ontario experience to here in Nova Scotia. Really all started back in 2007 with the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act that talked about the linkages and the integration of the environment and the economy, and then got into some specific environmental goals that could drive some action behind that. The first one on that was establishing a greenhouse gas emissions target for 2020. And similar to Ontario, that bill was passed with all party support and endorsed. Continues to be acted upon through 3 successive governments here in Nova Scotia. As a result of that legislation and the work that we did, the very next step was to put hard caps on the electricity sector. So the very first action that Nova Scotia did on significant action on climate change. And George Foote is here in the audience. He was the architect of that bill. So there's a lot of history behind it, but it really did set the first target for GHG emissions reductions and set the tone for reductions in Nova Scotia, because that is the biggest piece of emissions here in the province because of our heavy reliance on coal. We subsequently enhanced and created deeper caps up to 2030. So those caps will require a minimum of 25% reduction in total emissions from the electricity sector by 2020, and 55% reduction in the electricity sector by 2030. So over half of the GHG emissions will be required to be reduced from the system over the next 15 years. That's a significant reduction. We also have renewable energy regulations. Back when we started, renewable energy only accounted for about 10% of our generation. 2015, and then 40% target established for 2020. We're at about 26-27% right now, I think, on the system, which is largely made up of wind and a little bit of biomass. And we're well on the way to and hydro and bringing on muskrat falls in the maritime.
Can you bring the mic closer to your mouth?
Yeah, sure. Or I'll speak. In addition, so we've got some folks from Efficiency Nova Scotia here as well that can probably speak more in depth about our action on energy efficiency. But back in 2008, with the establishment of Conserve Nova Scotia and the various iterations of that organization to Efficiency Nova Scotia, and now Efficiency One, it's the first energy efficiency utility in Canada. So they actually actively compete for generation on the system in Nova Scotia. So where it's cost effective, it gets implemented. And through their programs over the past 8 or 9 years, electricity demand has been decreasing by 1 to 1.2%. What this time was. So that's really driven the demand for electricity down in the province. So that's a significant part of our work as well. Through this action, through the action and the focus on the electricity sector, through the targets that we have in place and the supporting and complementary regulations that we put in place, we're proud to say that we've met our 2020 economy-wide GHG emission target already. So we met that 6 years ago before 2020. Not only that, we've also met the federal government's 2030 targets 16 years early. So we've already achieved the target that the federal government has established for all of Canada. We're there right now. We are at 30% below 2005 levels. And more recently, I guess, through the negotiations that you've all probably been watching through the Pan-Canadian framework, Nova Scotia is committed to implement a cap and trade system in the province to cover not only the electricity sector, but all other sectors in the province. So right now, we're in the beginning stages of organizing what that cap and trade system will look like. So not only have we done a great job reducing the GHG emissions from the electricity sector, we're going to bring in the other sectors as well and continue to drive those emissions down even lower. Current projections show us, if we don't do anything else in the province, we'll be around 45, 46% below 2030 levels below 2005 levels by 2030. We're looking at almost a 50% reduction by 2030 here in Nova Scotia. And that really puts Nova Scotia far in front of other provincial actions, other provinces in terms of GHG reduction projections. So that's something that we can be proud of. Like Bruce said, those investments in the electricity sector really get borne by the ratepayer. So we need to recognize the role that Nova Scotians, I think, individually and groups such as those that are represented in this room, help create the conditions where people are willing to accept those types of regulations and actions that are costly, but recognize the longer-term benefits. So I think that there's a lot to be said for forums such as these that can advance the conversation, because it makes it easier for us as regulators to move the ball forward when the time is right. So, as I said, we're working right now. A lot of our focus is on extending our electricity sector caps past 2030 to deal with the federal requirement to close coal by 2030, and how that will integrate into our cap and trade system. But really what this is about is focusing on how we create a low carbon economy. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much for your comments. Jason, we'll move on to
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. You probably know this, but just to give you a little bit of background on our company and what drives us every day. We're Nova Scotia Power's wholly owned subsidiary of Emera. We're the primary electric supplier in the province of Nova Scotia for 500,000 customers. We have either ownership of or through contracts approximately 2,900 to 3,000 megawatts of installed generating capacity in the province to serve those customers, and about 27,000 kilometers of transmission and distribution circuits. So we have the obligation to serve in this province. We are a supplier of only resort in many cases, but we take it very seriously, and we're in the middle, as I said in my biography there, we're in the middle of a very large change of our power system. Power system planning was traditionally something that moved slowly, and the pace of what we've been seeing over the last decade or so, I think is quite remarkable. It used to be about new combustion technologies, and now it's about complete reversal of where you look to for your energy. And so it's Emera's focus in its companies that it works with move away from carbon-based generation and to look at more renewables. And you can see that plan playing out in pretty much all of the Emera-owned affiliates, certainly in Nova Scotia. Over the past decade, we've invested over $500 million in capital assets, and we've entered into something close to $5 billion in PPAs, power purchase agreements with IPPs for renewable energy. So very significant commitments made on behalf of our ratepayers to change our power system. And certainly Jason talked to some of this, and how is our power system changing? So if we look at 2005 as a baseline, our company's CO2 emissions have reduced by 36% from 2005. I think that's a dramatic change. And our renewable energy has increased to 27%. So around 2005, it would have been around 7 or 8%. Now it stands at approximately 27%. And that's largely through the development of close to 600 megawatts of wind power, responsible for close to 2,000 GWh a year of wind generation. So coal-fired generation from the 2005 level has decreased by 31%. So what I would say to you is the phase out of coal is already underway. We may not have put locks on the doors, but it's undeniable that coal is being phased out. And part of that story certainly is also the aggressive use of efficiency programming to stem the growth of energy sales and our energy demand in our province. Throw a few more numbers at you, and some of them we touched on already, but it's important context. You know, the challenge of coal phase out in Nova Scotia is tremendous. In 2005, 74% of our energy came from coal-based generation, and another 14% from natural gas and oil. And in 2015, I don't know the 2016 numbers, but it'll be in around the same. We reduced that to 56%. So that's the reduction I talked about earlier. So we still have 56% of our energy coming from coal. And by 2020, though, with the Maritime Link coming on, with the base block that's associated with that project, and other imports that could come through economy purchases, economic energy purchases, the coal figure could drop to 37%. So the shift is very much underway. You know, to put it in context, when you think about where we are today, 56% of our energy is still coming from coal. I think 60% roughly is about what the Ontario nuclear generation fleet is providing to energy to the Ontario market. So, you know, to say phase out the rest of your coal in Nova Scotia would be akin to asking Bruce and Ontario to figure out how to make nuclear facilities be replaced by 2030. So our starting point was very different. I think actually if you do the math, the amount of coal we've taken off our system is pretty much parallel in terms of if you look at the percentages to the two provinces. So I think a very good story to tell Nova Scotia. We can be, I think, very proud of that. Our ratepayers, our customers have really participated in that. The air emission hard caps and the renewable energy requirements of our province are what's driving that. And those hard caps, I refer to them as being ruthlessly effective at achieving these reductions. You can't buy through a hard cap. Right? Carbon tax you can buy through it. Cap and trade, there's other ways around that. But when you get a fleet hard cap, you have to meet it, and I think we've done well at doing that. As we look to the future, how do we go further? And there's a couple of challenges I think in front of us. We are improving our interconnections, our transmission interconnections in this province. Traditionally, we've only been connected to New Brunswick. When I ran our control center, it became very clear we were at the end of the line. We were at the end of the wire, and so that will improve with our connection of the Maritime Link and our access to tremendous renewable capacity in the form of hydro from Labrador. So that's a big game changer for us. But you know, how do we phase out coal to go further? If you want to go all the way, if you really want to shut it off, well, you need to replace that capacity. You need firm capacity to do that. You need system operators to hit a button and get instant gratification from. And so that's the challenge that's in front of us today. And certainly large-scale renewables is a vision that Emera has for this region, to look to Labrador and Quebec, to look at the transmission projects that are necessary to bring that energy in. How do you get from where we are to that future? And what timeline should you try to achieve that? That's, I think, where it's really up for debate for us. If we want to get coal off fast, it probably pushes us into going to natural gas-fired generation. And what's the lifetime of that natural gas-fired generation? Will we be able to amortize it, pay it down? It's a huge commitment for our utility to take on behalf of our ratepayers to commit to that. And so the vision that we would have, and that's, we I think working closely with the provincial government to try to achieve it, is if we can retain the coal at lower utilization levels, but retain it for the capacity for those coldest days of when you really need it. Not energy, but capacity, not as much energy, I should say, for capacity. Then you can sort of perhaps leapfrog the gas transition. There'll be some gas in our future for sure. There has to be. We'll need that on the ground to keep the lights on. But that's the vision of getting from coal to clean is the jargon we use around the office. Anyway, that's what it is.
All right, so we've heard quite a bit about the technical challenges involved in making this transition, and we've heard quite a bit about the regulatory context. And I think those are both very important pieces of the puzzle. We have heard a bit about the Pan-Canadian framework, which kind of takes us beyond the current regulatory context and introduces this arrangement between the federal and provincial government, which kind of changes the direction that we take, right? Jason has talked about the fact that up to now, our focus really has been on renewable energy targets for the electricity sector and hard caps for the electricity sector. What the Pan-Canadian framework does, it broadens the number of sectors, for example, that are, first of all, that are targeted, right? So through the cap and trade system, we're now looking at not just the electricity sector, we are looking potentially at transportation, at buildings, at industry, and although I don't think this is a popular one, at agriculture. So there are a number of sectors that will have to contribute to this, to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and eventually becoming greenhouse gas emission neutral in Nova Scotia. And then you have this, the second key element of the Pan-Canadian framework, which is the coal phase-out. And as I understand it, and Jason can correct me, I just want to provide a little bit more information about what my understanding is of how it is intended to work. The basic idea is that instead of the actual phase-out of coal by 2030, what Nova Scotia has negotiated is that it will achieve the same emission reductions that would be achieved if we were going to phase out coal by 2030 and replace it with natural gas. To me, one of the unanswered questions in that is whether we're assuming that the transition is completely from coal to natural gas, or are we basing the numbers in 2030 on a more realistic scenario of what would happen if we were to phase out coal by 2030, which would be likely a combination of natural gas, of renewables, of efficiency efforts, and so on. So that's maybe a minor point, but I think an important question in terms of how we are going to determine what the 2030 target is. And that's important because, as I understand it, the 2030 target is also the foundation for the electricity sector's role in the cap and trade system. So the basic idea is that the electricity sector will get free allocations for any emissions that remain by 2030 using this calculation. And then there's an opportunity for the sector to achieve further emission reductions by making more efforts, for example, to integrate renewables. And that additional effort will be rewarded because the electricity sector will then have the opportunity to sell those credits to other sectors that would also be included in the cap and trade system that might have more difficulty achieving emission reductions. And that's a system that potentially can address some of the issues around concerns around electricity price increases and so on, but it is conditioned, its effectiveness is conditioned on, or conditional on, the targets for all sectors that are included in this cap and trade system being ambitious. If they're not ambitious, and we've seen this in Europe, we've seen this elsewhere, the price collapse, and there's no incentive for anyone to do anything. And the other thing that we've learned from Europe and elsewhere is that for cap and trade system, there's a built-in incentive because for underestimating the ability to reduce emissions. So I think we have to be very careful, and we have to be very flexible in the design and the implementation of the cap and trade system to make sure that it sends the appropriate signal. And the other part that we have to do, I think we have to carefully think about who should bear the burden. How much of the burden should be borne by ratepayers for electricity, and how much of that burden should be of completing this transition should be put on other sectors. So that's one part, and I start here mainly because it ties better into what Mike and Jason have talked about. But the other piece that I want to talk a little bit about, for a couple of minutes, is one that hasn't been mentioned very much at all yet, and that is the Paris Climate Agreement. The Paris Climate Agreement actually provides the overall context for this whole discussion. And one of the fundamental differences between the Kyoto Protocol, which we've all been operating under up to now, and the Paris Climate Agreement is that the Paris Climate Agreement sets a floor, not a firm target. The floor is set by countries, but it is set by countries in full recognition that those targets are inadequate. The efforts that are identified in Canada's so-called NDC, Canada's targets for 2020 and 2030, are a good step, an important step, and I don't take any of this as criticism of the Pan-Canadian framework right now. I think it is probably the best we can achieve right now. But I think it's really important to understand that we need to do more. We need to do more. We're probably not going to be able to do more by 2020, but we need to do no more by 2030 than what is in the current Pan-Canadian framework. So as we start thinking about how we're going to implement these measures, we need to build the flexibility and the motivation in for all sectors that are participating in this to identify opportunities to do more. And I think the cap and trade system has the potential to do that, but again, only if we ensure that the targets for as many sectors as possible are included, and that the targets are sufficiently ambitious so that if Mike identifies an opportunity for Nova Scotia Power to achieve more, that he knows that he's going to get paid for that effort. And he only knows that he's going to get paid for that effort if he knows that the targets for the other sectors are tough enough that there will be a good price for the emission reductions that he's able to achieve. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you to all of our panelists. I think that they've given us a lot to think about and a lot to probably ask questions about, pointing both to some of the great successes we've had here in Nova Scotia and the hard work that's been done, some of the challenges we face, and some of the tools that might exist to try and facilitate the next step. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. The questions can be directed at any of the panel members, and we've got about 20-25 minutes for questions. I'll start right here in the fourth row back. Yes, sir.
Thomas Struckberg, I'm a professor here at Dalhousie University and also politically affiliated. I didn't figure out how. I'm getting a little bit tired of hearing how well Nova Scotia is doing. And it's great to have reductions. But in absolute numbers, what I hear is that even the projected 2030 emissions are only on par where Ontario and British Columbia is right now. So we are a dirty province from the numbers I have seen. And we have really to do more. In particular, I'm also questioning why is Nova Scotia Power has to do all of that? Why don't we open it up? So, for example, feed-in tariffs have been discussed many times and have very good effects in other jurisdictions. So what do you think about feed-in tariffs?
Are you asking a particular panel member or any panel member?
I can respond to the first part of the question on absolute GHG reductions. So if you look at Canada's most recent submission to the UNFCCC, our individual projection report out to 2030. It actually breaks down the provincial GHG emission reductions by province based on current actions. And in terms of an absolute reductions, Nova Scotia is contributing the biggest absolute reduction per person or per capita for size of the economy than any other province. Now, we're a small province, so a 46% reduction in Nova Scotia is 5 to 6 megatons, which is big for our province, but in terms of the coal plant closures in Ontario are 50 megatons. I mean that's 4 to 5 times what we are just as an economy. So we compare it on a percentage basis to make sure that we're doing apples to apples.
My point was not to look at the reduction rate, at the absolute emission numbers. And the emission per capita is projected to be only on par with Ontario, where Ontario is now.
Right, and the starting point was we were very far above where Ontario was, so it is a reduction. And from our perspective, we're looking at absolute GHG reductions. So for 2005 as a base year, we were at 24 megatons. We're projecting to be around 11 or 12 by 2030. Again, that's close to a 50% reduction over time for Nova Scotia. So it is something that we're proud of, and I think we can be proud of as Nova Scotians.
Meinhard, if you want to make a comment.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. First of all, I think it's important to recognize the contribution that has been made over the last decade. I don't think there's any doubting that. I think it's also important to recognize that we were a laggard, right? We were among the worst provinces in this country, especially in the electricity sector, in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions. There's no question about that. And again, I will go back to Paris. I think the comparison to other provinces looking forward is, doesn't really get us very far. I think, and we all need to recognize that what we committed to as a country a year ago essentially means we need to decarbonize as quickly as possible. And you can debate some of the detail in terms of how much you're going to rely on negative emissions in the future and so on. But there is no fair analysis, equitable analysis that I've seen that would allow a developed country, especially one that has failed to meet past targets and has been at the lower end of ambition so far, for a country like that to be carbon neutral any later than 2040. So that is not just the electricity sector, that is being carbon neutral. That doesn't mean we're going to get there, but I would hope that if we don't quite get there, it is because there are technical challenges, not because of a lack of effort. And so I don't think there's any question that this is a really serious issue, and we as a country have committed to making our contribution to keeping global average temperatures well below 2 degrees, striving for 1.5, and when you translate that into what that means for this country, for this province, there's no question that we need to decarbonize as quickly as we can.
Okay, important message. Rick,
So I think my question is for Jason. So Jason, you said that this province has already hit its federal target, and then you said the projections are if we do nothing by 2030, we could be at 46% reduction. So tell me why I'm wrong about this. If Nova Scotia's opted for a cap and trade system, it's not talking about joining the WCI or trading with other jurisdictions. Doesn't that mean the carbon price will be zero?
Yeah, so and to clarify, nothing additional. So if we don't do anything other than the regulations we already have, capping electricity and renewable energy regulations, we're still on a path on the trajectory to reach 46%. Now, with our new commitments to establish a cap and trade system in the province, that's going to require us to develop caps for the other sectors. Okay, that's in line with the guidelines that the federal government has put in place to the framework. So there will be additional reductions required from those other sectors, in addition to the current action on the electricity sector. So we will see emissions reduced even further than what they are already on path to. We're in the beginning stages of putting that system together right now. So stay tuned. We're hoping to be over on consultation really, really soon, and you'll be able to see a little bit more of what that looks like.
Do you have a projected carbon price?
Yeah, Matt Davidson. I'm maybe somewhat related to Brendan's question. I know the federal government has talked about, I guess, incremental stage carbon pricing over time. So a certain minimum price in 2018, 19, 20, 21, et cetera. I know you probably can't talk about specific details of that mechanism at this point, but is that a consideration developing cap and trade in Nova Scotia currently?
Yeah, it is. So sorry guys for talking about cap and trade stuff. The requirements that we'll have to meet in order to participate, and this was part of the agreement that we have with the federal government, is that the cap for those other sectors, and this is a requirement for anybody who does cap and trade, including Quebec and Ontario, it has to be equal to the reductions you would see in your jurisdiction if you had that carbon tax in your jurisdiction. So if you had a $10 per ton carbon tax in the province, you would see some reductions from consumer behavior as they change their behavior because prices have gone up, right? It'll be a modeling exercise with the federal government, but that will establish a new target or a new cap for that year for us. And then the next year it'll be $20, and the next year it'll be $30. So it will be decreasing over time. That's how it works, and that's, the feds wanted to make sure that there was some comparability of systems, because a tax and cap and trade are fundamentally very different systems. The objectives can be the same, but how you use the tools are different. But if your cap is equal to what you would achieve from a price, there is some equality in that approach.
Orange tie.
I think this is directed to Mike. Mike, you talked about the goal or the buzzword, I forget the term you used, to go from coal to clean. You also talked about the importance of having firm capacity and where gas fits into that mix. So can you see a difference between building new gas generation facilities versus refurbishing coal facilities now? And I'm thinking more of than anywhere else.
Yeah, we're trying to understand that right now. In fact, meeting with Jason tomorrow to talk more on that subject to understand what allowances will be in place around that subject. In my own mind, gas-fired generation is likely to be in Nova Scotia for quite some time in the form of certainly in the form of a peaking or a reserve type of generation. We are contemplating bringing in renewable energy from thousands of kilometers away on long transmission runs. A lot can happen to that energy on its way in terms of, especially wintertime, and we need to be assured that the options that we select, when they do go down, because all power systems are subject to failures, whether they're man-made or by nature, that the link was cut somewhere between here and northern Quebec or Labrador, that we would have we'd have capacity in the province to fall back on. So I believe that we'll have to have that in our mix. The rules of NERC and NPCC say we have to have reserve, we have to prove its availability, reserve generation, we have to prove its availability, and so on. So I think you could see natural gas playing a role certainly in backup generation, but also in the form of, and that's predominantly capacity, but also to make energy in some part of the mix. The part that makes investment, I think the part that makes investment in large-scale, high-efficiency combined cycle units challenging to understand right now is, once the federal government's done with coal, do they turn the page and get on with natural gas? And so how many years of could you enjoy the utilization of those investments before they become the natural gas phase of it? I think that's part of what challenges our business to understand that, and I think it's part of the motivation to say, can we find a way to go to an energy solution that goes straight for the renewable energy solution and potentially upscotch some of the large natural gas bill that you're seeing in other jurisdictions.
Three kind of interconnected questions. Cap and trade is always a little mysterious to me. Who are we going to trade with? Are we going to trade with our own forestry industry so they don't cut down trees? Are we going to trade with Rwanda so they don't cut down trees that they never had any intention of cutting down? And what about the carbon emissions that are created by exporting coal in another country? Isn't there some way that should, in the future, be designated as on our backs as well as on the backs of people who are burning coal?
Yeah, so the carbon trade system that we're putting together in Nova Scotia right now is intended to be within Nova Scotia only. So there wouldn't be any trading with Ontario, Quebec, or California, or any other jurisdictions. That's the plan at this time. It would be regulated entities, and the sectors would have to trade with each other inside of Nova Scotia. So that way the reductions that we achieve here will stay in Nova Scotia.
So we can be, if we have lax rules for deforestation, we can change the rules, we can have a trade with one of the producers in the forest.
In a cap and trade system, and even with your carbon tax, agricultural practices and forestry practices usually aren't covered. It usually focuses on just the combustion of fossil fuels. So when you put gasoline in an engine, or oil in an engine, or fire coal to generate electricity, agriculture and forestry are usually not covered. Now, there are opportunities in those sectors to institute practices to reduce their emissions through better tilling practices or better forestry management practices, and they generate what's called offsets that can be sold into the system to help with compliance. Now, there are very rigorous protocols in place, so if you're going to do that, it has to be a legitimate reduction. It can't just be something that you were doing anyway, because that's not a legitimate reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So as we develop the cap and trade system in Nova Scotia, we need to look at those opportunities and those protocols that are in place to make sure that the reductions are real and they are additional and they are verifiable. So those are the three tenets of how you ensure that they're actually happening.
Yeah, so a couple of comments. First of all, on the part that Jason just explained, that's all a question of design, right? And they can, this cap and trade system can be designed in different ways. So you can keep forest and agriculture in, you can keep it out. Right? So one of the nice things about designing your own and having it limited to Nova Scotia is that you do have the opportunity to design it so that it has integrity. But the devil's in the detail, right? So we need to see what the system's going to look like, and we need a lot of people to take a careful look at it to make sure that it works. Because we know from other jurisdictions that the initial design often has all kinds of loopholes, right? It took the EU a long time, and some argue they're still struggling to make it work, right? So I think it'll be a little bit easier to design something that works in Nova Scotia. But one of the things that, in this whole debate about cap and trade versus carbon tax is that it is a lot easier to kind of hide preferences given to certain sectors over others in a cap and trade system than if you have a carbon tax. So that just means, that doesn't mean a cap and trade system is worse. It just means you have to look very carefully at how it's designed, and so it requires close scrutiny. On the other issue you raised about who bears the burden of the coal that we're exporting, the UN rules, the Framework Convention rules say Nova Scotia gets the emission, or Canada gets the emissions from extracting it, and whoever imports it gets the emission from burning it. I can tell you that there is a kind of a growing global movement to discuss, at least, this question of who needs to keep fossil fuels in the ground. So I don't think it will get resolved by having Nova Scotia allocated the emissions from coal. But it is possible that over the next few years, we're going to have a discussion about whose fossil fuels stay in the ground. We're already seeing some signs of this, right? So Canada and the US, for example, have announced a moratorium on exploring offshore oil and gas in the Arctic and in some other parts, right? So that's a start of a movement of identifying who gets to explore their fossil fuels and who doesn't. And a big part of that discussion is developed versus developing countries.
I'm going to go here to my left and then the gentleman in the back. So first here.
Hello, Wade Rossler. Thank you for speaking. This question is first for Bruce. So no one's asked Bruce any questions.
Very kind of you.
Want you to be included? The title of today's event is coal phase out and why it can happen here. So that's very clear, a coal phase out. But for very good reasons, throughout the discussion, we haven't gotten to that point, right? We're coming to an understanding, looking at the bigger picture. We need to reduce all our emissions. So the question is a coal phase out as an idea, is there still value in focusing on that, and why or why not?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in focusing on it, and you know what sort of hasn't come out in the conversation, and one of the risks of being focused specifically on climate change is that we lose the broader issue around why coal is problematic, and it depends again on on where you are in your particular. Like I'm not sure smog is necessarily a problem here the way it was in Southern Ontario, but in fact it was the early research that I was doing. I did a lot of work on mercury toxicity in Canada. I was doing work on smog, work on climate, and it was when it sort of dawned on me, literally with a bunch of lists of where's all the mercury come from and what the largest source of pH is, polycyclic hydrocarbons, benzene, nitrogen oxide, acid rain producing gases, and then carbon dioxide. And it turns out that coal is on every single list as being one of the largest contributors of all of these pollutants. So one of the risks of focusing exclusively on climate is we forget that there's a lot of other reasons why we should be focusing on coal as being problematic. And and one of the challenges, again, we look at carbon pricing, we're not pricing mercury, we're not pricing, some places we are, SOx and NOx, the acid rain, chemicals. So I think so the answer is clearly, coal is problematic for a whole lot of reasons. On the doability, and I thought it was interesting, when we, the comment that, in not too long, Nova Scotia might be at 37% coal. Well, Ontario was at 35, 36% when we started the campaign. So suddenly that feels really doable. I agree, 56% sounds kind of a lot. If it's not that hard to get to 37%, it's not that hard to get to zero.
Didn't say it was hard.
If it's possible to get to 37% without tremendous disruption, then it feels more doable to get us down to 0%. I'll admit, it's not, this isn't easy to do. I mean, if it was easy to do, we would all be doing it. It requires, and I've had the benefit of being, involved on the board of our electricity system operator. So I understand the complexities of electricity systems, the timing, the investments. There's physics in electricity that most people don't understand, the liability issue. But the reality is that we're moving into a system, and again, this is happening all over the world, where things are changing dramatically just in terms of the technologies. Look at all the smart grids, microgrids, Wi-Fi, distributed systems, the lower cost of all of this. So we're seeing a very significant, both a disruption, but an opportunity to take advantage of all of these new technologies. And frankly, most of the the traditional institutions that were given the authority to deliver electricity, they're not experts in distributed technologies and community-based systems. So part of what the challenge is, we need new ways of like new institutional governance and new ways of thinking of these things that will make sure that we're taking advantage of the kinds of technological innovations that are happening. So that's sort of a long way of saying. I think we really need to focus and be clear that phasing out coal is doable in a reasonable time frame. And my point that if we set that as a target and then look at all of the different ways of doing it within and I'm a full believer in market forces, in being incredibly flexible, in having an open mind as to what you can do. Some of my colleagues, don't like it when I say, some can compete with nuclear power, right? I don't think they can economically, but, we can't foreclose. If we believe, and I think a lot of us do, that climate change is the biggest threat facing humanity over the next 3 decades, we can't foreclose on any options to address that problem. And so we need to have an open mind, be really flexible about what the opportunities are. One of the challenges is a lot of the institutions that we have that are structured to deliver services like electricity weren't built with this kind of dramatic, disruptive, technological innovation in mind. So that's a long answer. Sorry.
Hi, a question for Mike, and anybody else would like to answer about this. As a consumer of electricity, you're in this discussion, and part of, I believe, Nova Scotia Power's portfolio of renewable energy to replace coal is biomass. And the biomass, burning of biomass in this province, is my opinion that it results in tremendous collateral damage in the forest sector of our province. So my question to you is, when will Nova Scotia Power phase out that biomass plant with regards to replacing it with renewable energy? Will that wait until collateral damage comes? And the second thing is, does that biomass production fit into the cap and trade system?
So you're speaking of the biomass generator at Port Oscar?
Correct.
Yes. So that's a combined heat and power project that was built in conjunction with the pulp and paper facility to gain the obvious efficiencies of producing electricity and producing process steam. And the fuel stream behind that particular asset is highly regulated, and I probably can't debate you on all of its merits at this point in time, but I can tell you it is a regulated fuel supply. There are rules under which we procure the fuel, and I hope you believe me on that. I think we stick very tightly to those. The facility is relatively new. It qualifies as renewable energy under the renewable electricity regulations of Nova Scotia. It was a must-run facility until recently, when we realized we were in a surplus position against our renewable electricity regulations, and we approached the government about some cost relief. It's not most renewable sources are at this point in time are more costly than our conventional sources. But so it's dispatched economically right now. It's required on the system for either economic energy or capacity. So there's no plan in the near future to shut it down. It's in the mix. I know that part of Ontario is phasing out of coal. In fact, sees biomass burned in one or two of those plants.
I think there's, if I may, I mean, biomass is interesting too. There are, I think, some useful ways of using biomass, and typically the ones like that where it's tied to a forest facility, it's combined heat and power, and it's legitimate, forest waste. Those projects tend to make sense. Where it makes less sense, and frankly, the ones in Ontario make no sense. They were basically just political job creation projects to try to convert coal plants in northern Ontario, which actually they barely operate. And the whole point was everyone thinks that the biomass is coming from forest operations in and around coal plants in northern Ontario. The biomass is imported from Georgia. So it's completely insane. And the cost is more expensive. It's about the most expensive thing in Ontario. So they never run. It was just a political exercise. It's not really a power project. So there's a few examples where small-scale local biomass legitimately tied to the forest sector makes sense. Most other biomass, and certainly large-scale biomass, I don't think makes sense. So.
I suspect we have a very long conversation about biomass. I'm going to have to drop this to a close. I have one question I'm going to take right here in front of the gentleman. I'm sure that's our last question.
Yeah, I'm not sure who to address this to, because I'm not sure whether the answer is business, political, technical, or whatever. But why can't Nova Scotia be more aggressive in transitioning to a proven renewable energy source like wind?
I think that. So I think we have been. I
No,
really
but why
believe
can't we
we
be
have.
more aggressive?
We've been extremely aggressive.
But in
and,
the future.
and so as a, if
No,
you look
I'm
at,
talking about the future over the next 30 years.
so okay, let's talk about a few aspects of it. So we've got close to 600 megawatts of installed wind on our power system, that peaks at close to, well, around 2,000 megawatts, I'd say. And we can hit periods on shoulder season evenings, like shoulder season being in the fall and spring, when load is light, where we can have load under 700 megawatts. So wind as it stands now, as it's contracted under our current PPAs, is essentially a must-take commodity. And we take it when it shows, it gets priority dispatch because of the type of regulation we have. And it effectively, it's the generation of wind gets netted off the system load, and all the other generators on the system that are available will serve the remainder of the load. It's not a firm source of energy. So 2 to 3 times a week, our close to 600 megawatts of wind is making less than 10% of its nameplate rating. So that's one of its real operational limitations, because the way the power system operates, and you've heard Bruce allude to this, is system operators are balancing within the minute.
I understand that.
Yeah. So without storage technologies, right?
So are we maxed out now on the percentage of our electricity can come from wind? So as to reduce our electricity demand, they're saying that we're going to have to reduce the portion coming from wind that we have now for the technical reasons you just described.
So without storage technologies,
yeah,
right. Continue to put more wind on. We'll see more periods of wind curtailment, and it's probably unfortunate that we've gotten into this discussion about curtailment, because every other source of generation on the power system is actually dispatched to serve the system. Right now, the system is dispatched to serve wind, so we have to kind of break down that barrier that wind can't be dispatched. We have to find ways to use wind in the mix, but fundamentally, you need to have a duplicate backup power system to offset wind when it's not there. And so if we couldn't even build 3,000 megawatts of wind and still serve our customers at times. We could build 10,000 megawatts of wind and not serve our customers. So without a companion technology like storage, and then it becomes a cost question, okay? So, I mean, anything is possible if cost is no question, right? And the Danes have shown that, and the Germans are doing a pretty good job of that too. So.
Yeah. So just to add a little bit to that, I think part of what's important to recognize is that the answer to that will shift over time, right? So as we electrify transportation, as we electrify heating, as we get better at using smart grid technologies so that we can use power when it's available, as we improve our connections to the grids in other jurisdictions, the equation for all of this, right? So you have one answer for right now, but I think one of the challenges with this is that you want to make good decisions through this whole transition to get to the end point that you're looking to get to. And wind, I think, clearly will have a role to play in that.
That's going to close our panel session. First of all, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. So please give them a round. This afternoon with having the pleasure of meeting Lucy. And a lot of what we're talking about today is about keeping things available for Lucy, keeping the experiences that we've had available for Lucy and her children and their children. So this is really important stuff, and we appreciate all of you being here today. Thanks. Take care.